Well, howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Today, another exciting video. We are going down the AMD rabbit hole, and I'm about to explain to you what I mean by that. So back in July of 2019, the AMD Ryzen 5 3600 or 3000 series of processors came out. And I wanted to be on the AMD bandwagon, as I have been for the last couple of years. I've always been partial to AMD, but Intel's, they were ubiquitous and they just worked and that kind of thing. Now keep in mind, I've been a system builder since the late 80s, early 90s. I built hundreds of PCs for universities and banks and lawyers firms, attorney firms, etc. I built machine after machine after machine, so I'm not a neophyte when it comes to building machines. And the thing with building Intel machines is you pop a chip in, you pop it into the supported motherboard, you buy fast enough RAM, hook it all together, and everything just works, and very seldom I have problems. And that is the way it had been with AMD up until Ryzen 5 3000 series. And I'm about to explain to you the rabbit hole I have been going down for the past couple of weeks with my Ryzen 5 3000 series processor and my Asus Prime X570P motherboard. So this is the motherboard, of course, that I'm talking about right here, the Prime X570-P. I think I paid $150 for it back in July. And the idea was I really didn't need the 570 series chipset, but I wanted to be ready for HD or for PCI Express 4.0. So I thought, well, it's only $30 or $40 more than a B450 chipset at the time. We'll just get this. I'll pop the new Ryzen processor in there and we'll be good to go. So I went to Newegg because it was not available on Amazon at the time. I paired it up with this Corsair Vengeance 288 pin. You can see the RAM here. It's DDR4 3200. Here was the motherboard, the Asus Prime 570P, and the Ryzen 5 3600 6-core CPU. Now, when I got this unit, it came to me with either the 0804 or the 0807 motherboard BIOS had already been flashed onto it. So my general rule is I don't upgrade BIOSes on machines unless I have a specific need for it to correct something. So when I got this motherboard, like I said, it either had the 0804 or 0807 BIOS on it. I honestly don't remember. I didn't write it down, but I do remember it was an 08 series. And I immediately put Windows 10 on there, Windows 10 Pro, activated it, and it has been running since July with very little modification. Now, I paired this with a Gigabyte RX 560 or 570 video card in here with 4 gig of RAM. And I've just chosen to go the AMD route. Might as well have an AMD video card in there. And over the past few months since I set the system up, I noticed that it would do some strange things. And namely, when I say strange things, is anytime I finished recording a video in OBS or went to my video editing program, which is Adobe Premiere, the entry-level package, the $80 package, every time after I get done editing a video, the system would seem sluggish. In other words, when I go to play a YouTube video, it would be a little bit herky-jerky. There was some hesitation in the mouse movements. It was stuttering quite a bit. And I thought, well, it's probably the video card drivers, the AMD drivers. And I said, I'll just wait for another update. And I did. And then the recent update came out, the 20 update came out for AMD. Put that in, and it's still the same thing. It would run fine unless I edited a video, and then after I edited the video, I'd need to reboot, and then the system would seem just fine. It would seem normal. So what happened next is I got a wild hair, and I thought, well, I want to play around with Linux Mint again on this new X570 and see how it's doing. So and I wanted to kill two birds with one stone. I knew I needed to update the BIOS. I was quite a bit behind in the BIOS. So I went ahead. The first thing I did was I backed up all my data off of my Windows 10 setup and put it on a virtual machine so that I would still have my workstation. And then went ahead and I upgraded the BIOS to 1404. So we're looking at the BIOS update screens over here. So I went from, like I said, either 0804 or 0807, and I went right to 1404. I didn't want to do this one right away because it only came out in November of last year. So I thought maybe they hadn't got all the kinks worked out of it yet. So I went with 1404 first. And then I tried to install Linux Mint on this machine. And I had problems. I had major problems. So I thought, well, maybe that BIOS is a little bit buggy. So I went ahead and upgraded the motherboard to version 1405. And put it into BIOS defaults. I didn't do anything with the profiles in the memory. I didn't overclock, nothing like that. I just put a straight 1405 BIOS on there. I rebooted the computer, made sure I set all the BIOS to the default settings, and then proceeded to install Linux Mint again. No joy. Now this is Linux Mint 19. So I did a little research and come to find out that the Linux kernel, the version 5 of Linux, had some problems with the AMD 3000 series of processors. Some people have experienced issues, and that was another problem I ran into. This is really not well documented. So I tried different versions of Linux. I tried Pop! OS, I tried Ubuntu, I tried Kubuntu, I tried older versions, newer versions, to no avail. It just kept failing continuously. I mean, I couldn't even install it. It would bring up the installer screen and then crash, give me some vague error, and reboot. And so I thought, well, I don't really have time to mess with this. I want this machine to be running. So that's when I attempted to reinstall Windows 10. Immediately upon trying to install Windows 10 Pro. Now, initially I tried to install it with a Pixie boot and just, booting it and installing it in regular BIOS mode. That did not work. I kept getting blue screens on the installer, or it would come up and it would let me format the drive, and then it would go to install files and come up and tell me the files didn't exist anymore, that kind of thing. So then I tried, I have a Windows 10 UEFI boot USB stick, and I tried installing that. I thought, well, maybe I need to use UEFI to get better results, drivers loading or whatever. And that's Windows 10 1909, by the way, the current version of Windows 10, because I have access to, I can download the ISOs of the upgraded units from my Microsoft partner account. And it failed too, spectacularly. It would not, nothing I did, it would crash. And it wouldn't crash at the same place. Sometimes it would get to where it installed the operating system, and then it would crash. Sometimes it wouldn't even get that far. And I would get errors like driver not equal to, or memory errors, or that kind of thing. And so the first thing I thought was, evidently something in this BIOS update is bonked this machine. So my thought was, well, I'll just go back to the 0804 or 0807 BIOS and just reflash it to that. Can't do it. You can't go back to those 08 BIOSes once you've flashed to the 10 series or the 12 or the 14 series. You can't go back to the 08 series. That plan was out the window. So I grabbed my Ryzen 5 2600 system that I had with the Gigabyte B450 Aorus Pro Wi-Fi motherboard, and I put that here and booted it up to Windows 10, and it was fine. Now this unit is on the F41 BIOS from Gigabyte. We'll get to Gigabyte here in a minute because it's interesting what's happened. So I took this board and unit and put it on the bench behind me, and I went ahead and ran a mem test on it. I think I did 15 passes in mem tests. Let it run overnight because I thought, well, maybe I've got a bad stick of RAM, and it was just the new BIOSes outed that bad stick of RAM. That wasn't the case either. The RAM passed with flying colors. So I attempted to reinstall Windows 10 again. Nothing I did worked. I tried a different video card on that unit. I tried a different hard drive on that unit. I took RAM out of my Ryzen 5 1600, which is down there, put it into that unit, into that AMD ARM to that Asus motherboard, and attempted to install. Nothing I did worked. It would simply crash. So the only thing I figured is maybe I had a component go bad on that motherboard. So my next option was to order a replacement motherboard. And I've decided I don't need PCI Express 4 right now. What I was looking for was a USB-C or USB 3.1 version 2, whatever it is. That's what I really wanted on this board. And I found out by getting the Aorus, the B450 Aorus M motherboard, it had 4 RAM slots on it. Well, let me show it to you here. So this is the board I ordered to replace it with. The B450 Aorus M. It's got 4 RAM slots on it. It's got the USB 3. It's got USB-C. So everything I needed, right? And the beauty is that if you put a Ryzen 5 3000 series processor in here, you actually get PCI Express 4 on the NVMe slot with BIOS version F50. That was my understanding. So I thought, well, this will be a win-win. Yeah, I don't have PCI Express 4, but who cares? I don't have a PCI Express 4 video card. But I did want the NVMe drive to run at full speed, so I thought, well, it'll be a win-win situation getting this board. So this board came in on Tuesday, and I put it on. Actually, it's sitting there on my bench right now. It's on top of the motherboard box. I put the I've got an MSI RX 560 video card I put in there, AMD, and I put the RAM in there, put the CPU in, went to go install Windows, and guess what happened? Same damn thing. It crashed. Now, the first thing I checked on this motherboard was to make sure that it had the current BIOS on it. Now, it's printed right on the box. This unit is Ryzen 5 3000 ready. So I went into the BIOS and verified, yep, it had the F50 BIOS, which is the most recent BIOS from Gigabyte. This is the Gigabyte website, and you can see F50 is their most recent BIOS update. So I thought all was well. So I began to eliminate things. I began to eliminate the RAM. I eliminated the hard, just everything I did on the Asus motherboard I did on this one, and nothing I did would allow me to install Windows 10 on this machine. It never crashed in the same place. It was unstable completely. Even with the first thing I do is go into the BIOS and use the default settings or the optimized defaults, because I know those have been tested by the motherboard manufacturer to be stable. Nothing I did would work. So I started doing a little research, and there's absolutely nothing out there about this problem that I've been able to find. The closest I came was a YouTuber who has the same board I did, and he has run into some squirrely problems with this motherboard, but it turns out he was using an older Athlon processor, and that was the root of his problem. But he did point me to something very interesting, and that was, he said the F50 BIOS that he loaded was the F50A, and that was supposedly a beta BIOS, and this was about 3 months ago. Now I notice on Gigabyte's website they only have F50. I don't see an F50A. But he did say in that video that he went back to the F41 BIOS because he was having trouble, and that seemed to solve his stability issues. So, what do you think Unky Joe did? That's right, I downgraded to the F41 BIOS, and suddenly all my problems were fixed. And that includes that I could go into the BIOS and set the XMP profile on my RAM and get full speed out of it. Now, I did check on this RAM, this Corsair RAM that I have. It is listed on the Gigabyte compatibility list, so it is compatible. So not only was I able to install Windows 10 and get it configured, I was also able to enable the XMP memory profile, and voila, I ran Ada 64 on that overnight. The CPU temperature, I've realized I'm going to need to get a better cooler, because the CPU temperature is running at about 85 to 90 C all during the test, and that's in a, that's in an open air environment with no case around it. So that Wraith cooler they send with that AMD is not going to be able to, because this unit is going to be editing video and that kind of thing, and hitting those processors. I'm going to need to get a better cooler, but I digress. The point is, F41 BIOS is stable. So I now know without a shadow of a doubt that the BIOS has been my problem all along. And not only do I have that problem on the Gigabyte board, I have the problem on the Asus board. Now the problem with the Asus board is I'm stuck on that BIOS that it's on. There's nothing I can do. So I'm going to have to get a hold of Asus technical support, or maybe one of you that has that board could see if you could replicate this problem, because I cannot be the only one having this problem, and it only happened when I did the BIOS upgrade. So let me tell you how I got everything configured. So I've got an MSI RX 560 AMD video card in here. It's got the Ryzen 5 3600 processor, and I have 2 sticks, 8 gig sticks of Corsair Vengeance RAM in here. These are approved RAM for this motherboard. I have looked them up. They do support XMP mode as well. So let me show you what I got in there. So it's the Corsair Vengeance right there, and there is the model number if you want to try to see if the camera will focus on that. There it is. Now this is the CMK16GX 4M 283216. So it came as a kit, 16 gig kit. Now this is also the RAM I was using on the MSI motherboard. Now this RAM has not been tested on the MSI X570 board, and I thought, well, that could be my problem. I've been thinking RAM has been my problem all along. I also have an SSD drive in here. Okay, now this unit came pre-flashed with the F50 BIOS from Gigabyte. It's already on there. This is the USB key I'm going to be using to install Windows 10. I could also install it on the network, but for my intents and purposes, we're just going to install from the USB key so I can get the UEFI mode. So I do have a network card, or the network card plugged in. I have the Samsung SSD drive here. It already has a version of Windows on there, but I want to show you what's happening with the F50 BIOS. So I'll do my best to capture all of this. First thing I want to do is go into the BIOS, just so you can see how I've got that set up. Alright, so I'm in the BIOS, and the first thing is you can see, well, I'll show you here that in a second. Let me go over to save and exit, and I'm going to come down here to load the optimized defaults. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to load the optimized defaults. Hopefully you can see that. Enter yes. So what that means is I've just got the default settings on here. Let me go ahead and go into easy mode, and you can see we have a BIOS version F50. We have the AMD Ryzen 5 3600 6-core processor. Now the RAM it's reading as 2138.88 megahertz, and it's running it at 1.2 volts. This RAM is actually designed to run at 1.35 volts. Alright, so I've gotten rid of some of the ambient light, so you should be able to see it better now. So I'm just in easy mode right now. Now I'm not going to tweak the RAM, I'm not going to do anything. I just want to set this darn thing so that it will boot with the BIOS defaults, the optimized defaults, which normally would give you just a basic, allow you to install an operating system and not have any problems. So I'm going to go ahead and save and exit this. Then it's going to reboot, and I'm going to try and be fast enough to press the F12 key. So now what I want to do is select my UEFI UDIS 5 partition 2. This is my Windows 10 1909. It's very important you understand I'm running Windows 10 1909 off of this USB key. So I wanted to boot UEFI off of that key. And what we want to do is try and do an install of Windows 10. Now keep in mind when you're booting in UEFI mode, this is something people don't tell you too, you're going to see the Aorus logo, and then eventually you'll see the little Windows spinning icon here as part of the installation. It just takes a few seconds to get up to that screen, and you can see it's now spinning. If you were installing in non-UEFI mode, you would see the normal boot up screen, the Windows boot up screen. So I'm just going to select next, install now, and then this will take another few seconds to get past this point. Now, in the past, it has crashed at this point as well. I have tried installing this via my Pixie boot over the network in non-UEFI mode. I've tried installing it in UEFI mode. This is the same exact problem I was having on the X570 Asus motherboard. And I'm going to tell you what the common denominator is. I think you've probably figured it out already, but it's the BIOS. All of this stuff started happening when I went off of a BIOS that was working and upgraded to a newer BIOS to hopefully resolve some of the issues I was having with the Asus Prime X570 Prime. And this is the kind of thing that happens. It'll either hang on the boot or it'll crash after installing. But it's not even getting us to this point. It's just, you know, it's going to crash. So what I'm going to do next, now I already have Windows 10 installed on here. The way I did it was going back to an older BIOS. As you can see, it's just going to crash. So let me reboot the machine. Alright, so I'm going to try and boot one more time. And mind you, I'm having to do this in a dark room, so bear with me. So I'm going to hit the F12 key. Alright, we're going to try and boot off the USB key again. Let's see if it'll move on past this point again. And I'll talk to you while it's doing its thing here. And there it goes. Okay. Now we got a media driver your computer needs is missing. And that's the thing. Each time this error is going to be different. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is I'm just going to let it boot off of an already installed version of Windows 10. So let me shut this off. I'm going to remove the USB key. And I'm going to go ahead and try to let it boot into the Windows 10 that's already installed in here, and I know it was working. That's the thing with Intel. You threw a processor in there, you threw RAM in there, you threw a video card in there, and everything just worked. But for some reason, these AMDs are so picky about RAM. And there we go. See, looks like Windows didn't start correctly or didn't load correctly. So let's restart my PC. I don't think it's going to change anything, but we'll give her the old college try. This is what I've been trying to wrap my head around for the last week and a half. And I'll give you the series of events when I go back to my desk as to exactly what happened and how I discovered this problem. Now there you go. It looks like Windows is working, right? Alright, so let's go ahead and log in. We got our Windows desktop. Everything appears to be working just fine. Yep, I can see my C drive. Everything looks good out there. Now let's try to restart. Now still I'm just using, default settings on the F50 BIOS. Okay, it's booted up again, and there we have a crash. So, and you see it says attempted execute of no execute memory. All of these error messages that I seem to be getting on this board and I was getting on the MSI were all related to either IRQ not equal to or less than, or some random memory error. So it's going to try and boot again. And it's probably going to tell us we need to restart in recovery mode. Oh, nope, it's booting up this time. But I don't think it'll be long before it crashes. In other words, just not dependable, not reliable. And you know, normally my go-to when I have a problem is memory. Normally 9 times out of 10, any problems I have with a motherboard and getting an operating system to load always has to do with memory. Which is what I think it is in this case. I think the memory timings are so critical on these AMD systems. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. The memory timings, oh wow, that's even better, are so critical on these AMD motherboards that that's why I'm getting the crashes. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to attempt to do is to flash the BIOS back. We're working with the F50 right now. The latest stable BIOS I was able to get to work was the F40. So that's what I'm going to flash it back to. So I'm just going to come here to QFlash, hit the enter key, and I'm going to go to update BIOS. And I have the F41, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I have the F41 BIOS out there. That's the one I'm going to flash it with. I'm going to go ahead and press this to start and let it update the BIOS. And then once that's done, I'll come back and it should reboot automatically and try to boot off of Windows. But I'll come back when that changes. So while we're waiting for the BIOS to flash, now, there used to be a saying where I worked, was if you wanted it to break, give it to Joe, and I've said this before. For some reason, whatever convoluted methods I have of installing Windows, I can always trigger a failure. If something's going to fail, give it to me and I can make it fail. But this is weird, because am I the only one on this planet that is having this problem? It started with the X570, and now I know there is probably nothing wrong with that X570 motherboard other than the BIOS. Now, if you can't even install Linux, you've got serious issues. So I gave up on Linux and went back to install Windows 10, and that's when I noticed that X570 Prime from Asus was doing the exact damn thing this Gigabyte is doing with the new F50 BIOS. So, what is the common denominator? The BIOS. But I thought, well, maybe the BIOS problem is related to a clean install of Windows, and that maybe you wouldn't have this problem if you installed Windows with the F41 BIOS and then went back, upgraded your BIOS, and you know, did all the updates on Windows 10, and then came back and rebooted your machine and updated the BIOS. But that isn't the case. That is not the case at all. Now, this may have broken Windows. I haven't tested going back from the F50 to the F40, I know, or the F41. I know that when I had the F41 BIOS in here, I had no trouble. I was able to run Ada. Let me log in here. Yeah, I was able to run Ada, stress tested, etc. Everything worked fine. Now, no crashes, right? Not yet, anyway. That doesn't mean squat, though. But I'm going to go ahead and restart, and we're going to go into the BIOS. All right, so we're in the BIOS. I'll show you the BIOS here in a minute. But the first thing I want to do is go load optimize defaults. Yes, and then I'm going to come back to this screen, and I'm going to go to the easy mode. So right now you can see we're on the F41 BIOS. It's identified the processor. It's got the RAM frequency wrong. That's the other thing I can do in here. Is I can go into classic mode. I can now come down here to advanced memory and set my profile 1, and you can see it now detects my RAM properly and it's got the correct voltage in there. Now I need to save this and exit, and then it should boot back into Windows 10. That's the other thing with these when you're booting UEFI, you know, I'm a BIOS guy. I'm old school. I like the old BIOS boot method, but UEFI does have some benefits. It's, you know, it can load drivers and startup that BIOS can't. So now it, you know, look, it's coming up, it's running. I'm not getting any more of those crashes I was getting, and my memory is now in the optimal setting. So this is the F41 BIOS. All right, so let's go ahead and run the system stability test under Ada. I'm gonna go ahead and click on start, and you should hear it spin up and it'll start running the test. So I'll let this run for half an hour or so. I did this last night, so I know this is going to work. But I just wanted you to see the kind of error messages I was getting, because a lot of people, if they don't see it on video, they're going to go, well, you did this wrong, or you know, bullshit. There's obviously a problem with these motherboard manufacturers and these BIOSes that they are writing. They're having stability issues, and I cannot be the only person on planet Earth having these problems. Now I've been building PCs since the late 80s, and you know, back in the 286 days and back in the IBM PC days, I've been building PCs. So and as the technology changes, I've tried to keep up, but these are basic things that should be fixed. You know, memory timings. I think it all has to do with memory timing. On here is my gut. That's what my gut tells me. But these should be fixed. I mean, the BIOS updates should not be breaking stuff. And like I said, this is, let me show you what version of Windows this is. So, and I've got all the updates done. So let me bring up WinVer, just so you can see that we are indeed running Windows 10 1909, build 18363.693, and I hope you can see the screen, because my little display here is not clear enough to show me whether you can see it clearly or not, but I think you can. You get the point. So we've done everything right, and it affects Linux too. I can't run a Linux operating system on BIOS revision B or F50. So what's the deal? And it's not limited to Gigabyte. I had this problem on the Asus X570 Prime as well, or Model P, X570-P motherboard. So yeah, there you go. Proof is in the pudding, eh? One of the other things I noticed is that when I finally was able to install Windows 10 on the F41 BIOS on the Gigabyte board, that when I went to do the Windows 10 updates, one of those was an AMD system update, version 2.2.0.124. My hope was that after I got Windows 10 loaded, got all the updates on it, and loaded the AMD software for the video card and the chipset, that I would then be able to run on the F50 BIOS and things would be stable. I thought perhaps maybe Windows 10 was missing some driver or some compatibility update, but no. As you see in this video, still not stable. So I managed to downgrade the BIOS again to F41, and as you can see, well, as you can't see because Ada's not on the screen anymore, it's been running for hours just fine, and I'm able to do everything with it I need to. Now, I want you to look at this also because people like to have that knee-jerk reaction in the comment section and go, well, you didn't do this, and you should know to do this, and all right. Put that all aside, but look at it from the aspect of a neophyte, someone who's building their first computer, right? They should just be able to drop a processor in there, do their research, of course, up front, talk to other people, find out what RAM goes with it, buy it from the compatibility list, all that kind of stuff. I did that, and so would a new user, I'm assuming. They put all this stuff together, and then they start having these problems. Now, they don't have the benefit of experience that you and I do in troubleshooting these issues. And you can imagine how much time, look how much time I've wasted on this. It's ridiculous, okay? This platform should be stable. I mean, it's been out long enough. These people should have their act together, whoever these people are. But just look at it from the perspective of a new user. That would put a really sour taste in your mouth toward AMD. Yes, I know Intel had some problems with their higher-end processors with RAM compatibility and issues, and it took them a little while to get the issues ironed out. So I'm not ragging on AMD, but you know, AMD's putting a lot of stuff out there really quickly. And I just want to make sure that the motherboard manufacturers are keeping up. And from what I see, they're just not doing it. And you know, it's going to be a deal killer for a lot of new people buying or building their first computer. You know, I don't know that I can recommend AMD at this point until they have their stuff together. And perhaps it's a matter of me just not doing the research. But you know, when you go to the company's website and you look up their compatibility list and you buy everything on that list and still have problems, well, that's shame on you, not shame on me, right? So there you go, YouTube. We hope you found the video entertaining and informative as always. And please leave your comments down in the comment section. If you've got similar items like this, let me know what your experience has been with them. You know, and hopefully I'll get an answer from somebody. I would love to have an answer from Wendell over at his channel and see if he could maybe put a system like this together and see if he's experiencing the same kind of trouble I am. I will post the specifications of all the components I'm using down below, and for those of you to see, so that you know exactly what I'm apples to apples comparison, and see if you can you know, recreate this kind of problem I'm having. So there you go. Donate if you're so inclined. We take PayPal and we take Patreon, and it's your generous donations that help us keep this channel going so we can buy these components and test them and see how they work out. Don't forget, thanks for coming to see us, and don't forget, we'll see you on the other side.